The town of Villisca never truly woke up after that summer of 1912. Even decades later, its name whispered through Iowa's cornfields like a curse carried by the wind. People avoided the street where the Morehouse once stood, and even those who dared to pass by never lingered after dusk. Because something about that placed air, the silence felt alive with unfinished business. For years, every investigator who reopened the case believed they could finally solve it. Every one of them walked into Villisca confident, and left with questions that didn't make sense. The police files were thick, thousands of pages, interviews, false confessions, names crossed out in red ink. But the deeper they looked, the more the evidence seemed to unravel. One man in particular obsessed over it, a retired detective named Robert Hanley. He arrived in Villisca in the early 1990s after finding an old box of documents at a state archive. Inside were black and white photos, brittle letters, and a drawing of the Morehouse made in a child's hand. Across the bottom of the paper, written in pencil, were the words, "He comes at night." Hanley didn't know then how important that piece of paper would become. He started by retracing the original investigation. Back in 1912, detectives had been overwhelmed and no forced entry, no fingerprints, no footprints outside the house. Every door was locked from the inside. The killer had moved through the home like a ghost. There were suspects, of course. A traveling preacher named Reverend George Kelly. He attended the Children's Day event at the Moore Church just hours before the murders. He was eccentric, nervous, always talking too much about religion and sin. 2 weeks after the murders, he reportedly confessed to a detective on a train, but then he took it back. Later, during his trial, the confession was ruled inadmissible, coerced. They said he was acquitted after just 1 hour of jury deliberation. Still, some believed he was the one. Others insisted he was simply an easy scapegoat. Hanley wasn't convinced by any of the known suspects. Instead, he became fixated on a series of eerily similar axe murders that took place across the Midwest around the same time: Melsworth, Kansas; Colorado Springs; Paola, Kansas. Each one carried the same signature: the entire family murdered in their beds. Windows covered, mirrors draped, lamp, chimneys removed, axes left at the scene. The pattern was too precise to be coincidence. It was the work of a single traveler, someone who rode the railways and vanished before dawn. Hanley called this mysterious figure the man on the train. He believed this killer used the railroad system as his hunting ground, choosing small, isolated towns near the tracks. He'd arrive quietly, commit the crime, and leave before sunrise, catching the next train to nowhere. It was a terrifyingly simple method, and it worked. But then came the twist that made Hanley question everything. While reviewing the Villisca crime scene photos, he noticed something that had been overlooked for decades. In one photo, a mirror on the wall had been covered, not with a piece of clothing, as the reports stated, but with a child's drawing, the same style of drawing he'd found in that box years before. The same message, "He comes at night." Had the killer left it? Or was it something the children had drawn before they died? The question haunted him. Hanley traveled to the house itself. By then, it had been restored and turned into a small museum. Tourists could walk through it by day, but by night, caretakers swore strange things happened there: footsteps in the attic, doors creaking open, whispers echoing in the children's room. Hanley stayed overnight, determined to feel what the killer might have felt. He brought a notebook, a recorder, and a copy of the crime scene photos. But as the hours passed, the silence inside that house grew unbearable. He later described hearing faint sounds, like the soft rhythm of breathing coming from the attic. He checked, nothing was there. And yet, something felt wrong. At around 3 a.m., his recorder captured a faint tapping sound, followed by what some later described as the voice of a child. Soft, almost like a hum. Then the words, "He's still here." Hanley never released the original tape. He retired from his investigation a few years later, moved away, and refused to speak publicly about Villisca again. The last thing he ever said about the case was written in his journal. Some stories are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be survived. Years passed. And yet Villisca didn't rest. In 2014, a paranormal investigator named Johnny Hauser spent a night in the house as part of a documentary project. At exactly 12:45 a.m., he was found unconscious with a stab wound to his chest. No weapon was found, and no one else was in the house. He survived, but when asked what happened, He said only one thing: it wanted me to leave. That event reignited public fascination with the case. The Villisca Axe Murders became more than a historical mystery. It became an American legend, a haunting symbol of evil that hides behind ordinary walls. New DNA tests were proposed, though most evidence had long deteriorated. Modern profilers tried to reconstruct the killer's mind, suggesting he might have been a transient serial offender, emotionally detached, driven by ritualistic control. But every modern analysis still circled back to the same conclusion. No one truly knew who had done it or why. And yet, there's one final detail few talk about. In 2020, when the Villisca Historical Society digitized its archives, an old note was discovered in the back of a photograph album. It read, in faded ink, "He comes at night, ... I see him from the window." It was signed Lena M. Lena Stranger, one of the murdered girls. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakable. It wasn't proof of anything, but it meant something deeper, that before that night, before the screams, before the silence, she knew someone was watching. And maybe that's the real horror of Villisca. Not that a killer walked free, but that the town itself became a graveyard for the truth. Every theory, every confession, every investigation buried under time, silence, and fear. The Morehouse still stands today, its white paint peeling, its windows dark. Visitors say that when they stand outside at night, they can hear faint laughter, the echo of children playing upstairs. Then the sound stops. Suddenly, and everything goes still. Because in Villisca, the night never truly ends. It just waits. The axe lay at the foot of the bed in the parents' room. Slick, heavy, its handle smeared dark. It belonged to Josiah Moore himself. He'd used it for chopping wood behind the shed. The coroner took notes in silence. He counted blows, sketched outlines, studied footprints that led nowhere. There was no sign of forced entry, no theft. The killer had been in control. Calm, deliberate. Outside, women whispered prayers. Men stared at the ground, shaking their heads. Children were pulled away before they could glimpse the horror. And still, no one could explain how something so monstrous had happened in their own town. Sheriff Horton wiped sweat from his brow. "Lock it down," he muttered to his deputy. "Nobody leaves this property. ... Nobody." But it was already too late for that. By nightfall, stories had spread faster than he could stop them. Some said it was a traveling tramp. Others claimed it was revenge, an old business feud of just... And a few whispered darker things, that it wasn't human at all. The following day, 2 doctors from Red Oak arrived. They examined the bodies again, recording details that chilled everyone present. The blows to Josiah were the worst, so violent. The blade had left deep marks in the ceiling from its swing. The others had been struck while asleep. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle. It was as though they'd never even woken up. When the doctors finished, the coroner quietly said he wanted them gone. All of them. Sheriff Horton didn't answer. He was staring at a faint footprint on the floor. Small, bare, ... maybe from a child. But when he looked closer, it vanished beneath the shuffle of another man's boot. Evidence lost. Just like that. That evening, the town gathered at the Presbyterian church. Less flickered. Mothers held their children close. No one spoke for a long time. Then the pastor stood. "This was not the work of God," he said softly. "It was the work of darkness, ... and it has found its way into Villisca." People began locking their doors that night. Some nailed their windows shut. Others packed their belongings and left town altogether. Fear had settled in, and it wasn't leaving. Days passed. The Morehouse remained sealed off. Deputies stood guard, though few dared to enter. Investigators from nearby counties arrived with cameras and fingerprint powder. It was the first major case in Iowa to use such methods. They dusted the doorknobs, the lamp glass, the axe handle. But every print was smudged or partial, useless. In the attic, they found 2 cigarette butts, a kerosene stain, and a hole in the ceiling boards just large enough for someone to watch through. From there, the killer would have seen every move the family made before the lights went out. He waited ... silent, watching them laugh, pray, and tuck their children into bed. It wasn't a crime of rage. It was patience. It was control. The first suspect emerged within days, a traveling minister named Reverend George Kelly. He'd attended the same church service that night, had left town by train early the next morning, and was known for his strange behavior and erratic preaching. Some called him eccentric. Others said he had a fascination with the case that felt unnatural. Kelly even wrote letters to investigators and reporters, offering theories no one had asked for. At first, they dismissed him as harmless, but soon, he began describing details that hadn't been made public, like the covered mirrors, the lamp without its chimney, and the precise positions of the bodies. How could he have known those things, unless he'd been inside? When questioned, Reverend Kelly claimed God had shown him visions of the murders. "God speaks through me," he told them, eyes wide, hands trembling. "I saw what was done. I saw the evil." Detectives exchanged uneasy glances. They decided to keep him under surveillance, but the more they watched him, the stranger he became. He spoke to himself, wandered the streets at night, and sent disturbing letters to women in town. When they searched his belongings, they found newspaper clippings about the Moore family. Every one of them carefully cut out and folded. The sheriff brought him in again. "Where were you the night of June 9th? Kelly hesitated. "On the train," he whispered. "Anyone see you?" "No, ... And then he smiled. Just a faint, almost polite smile. The kind that makes your stomach twist. But without solid evidence, they couldn't hold him. He was released ... free to roam once more. Meanwhile, new theories emerged. Some said Josiah's former employer, a man named Frank Jones, had hired someone to kill him over a bitter business dispute. Jones denied it, but gossip tore through Villisca like wildfire. Neighbors took sides. Even church pews emptied as people began suspecting one another. The Moore's store shut down. The Stillinger family moved away. His house on 2nd Street stood empty. No one wanted to go near it. At night, passing by, people said they saw lights flicker inside. Others swore they heard children's laughter echoing faintly through the windows. The sheriff called it nonsense, but he never walked that street alone. Weeks turned into months. Then, out of nowhere, another case surfaced eerily similar. A family in Kansas, murdered in their sleep, an axe left behind. No witnesses. Then another, in Illinois, always in Silenthan, Colorado. Always near railroad lines. Investigators began to wonder if Villisca was just one stop in a much larger nightmare. Detectives contacted the Bureau of Criminal Investigation in Washington, D.C. The press started calling it the Midwest Axeman. Some said he was a drifter, hopping freight trains, choosing families at random. Others believed it was someone local, someone hiding in plain sight. But as quickly as the killings began, they stopped, and with them, the trail went cold. Years passed. The Moore house decayed. Windows boarded, paint peeled. Children dared each other to peek inside. The townspeople moved on outwardly, at least, but no one forgot. Reverend Kelly was eventually arrested again, years later, after allegedly confessing during a breakdown. He described the murders in vivid detail, saying he'd been commanded by God to slay the wicked. Yet his story changed each time he told it. Sometimes he said he acted alone. Sometimes he said there was another man, someone watching from the attic. He was tried twice. The first trial ended in a hung jury. The second acquitted him entirely. And after that, the case was closed for good. But everyone knew it wasn't over. Not really. Because whoever did it, had vanished into the cornfields, leaving nothing but silence behind. Even now, more than a century later, the house remains unchanged. The walls still whisper. Tourists walk through its rooms, cameras trembling in their hands. Some claim to hear footsteps in the attic. Others hear the faint echo of a child's giggle, and then the creak of a door closing softly, as if someone doesn't want to be disturbed. The floorboards hold the memory of that night. The mirrors still hang covered, and beneath the dust, the outline of something dark, something that never really left. For years, people have searched for answers, historians, criminologists, even psychics. Each time they think they've found the truth, it slips away. Because the Villisca case isn't just a murder story, it's a haunting, not of ghosts, but of doubt. Whoever killed 8 innocent people that night didn't just destroy a family. They took something from the town itself, the belief that goodness was enough to keep darkness away. And maybe that's why, even now, Villisca feels ... unfinished, as though somewhere out there, the truth is still waiting to be unearthed. Villisca, Iowa, 1912. A town of barely 2,500 souls, neat rows of white picket fences, a church bell that rang every Sunday, and streets that smelled of lilac and coal smoke. People waved at one another from their porches. Doors were left unlocked. Children rode their bicycles until dusk, their laughter echoing down Main Street. It was the kind of town that made you believe evil couldn't find its way here. But that belief would soon be shattered forever. By June of that year, Villisca was thriving. The Montgomery County Fair had just passed, leaving behind the scent of sawdust and caramel apples. Josiah Moore, a respected businessman, ran the local implement store, selling everything from farming tools to kerosene lamps. He was a church elder, a devoted father, and one of the town's most trusted men. His wife, Sarah, was known for her soft-spoken kindness. She ran Sunday school for the Presbyterian Church. Together, they had 4 children: Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul. Neighbors often said the Moore home was filled with laughter, but on the night of June 9, 1912, that laughter faded into silence. That evening, the Moore family hosted a small church event, the Children's Day service. Sarah had organized it, and everyone in town came to watch their kids perform recitations and hymns. Among the children attending were Lena and Ina Stillinger, 2 sweet, shy sisters who were invited to spend the night at the Moore's house afterward. No one could have guessed that would be their last night alive. All day long, people noticed a mantle, thin, with a wide-brimmed hat, loitering near the corner of the hardware store. He didn't speak much, but some recalled how he kept glancing toward the Moore house. At 5 p.m., he was seen sharpening a pocketknife against a wooden post near the railroad tracks. Later that evening, as the townsfolk filled the church, that same man was seen again standing in the back row, eyes fixed on the children performing on stage. When asked later, witnesses couldn't agree on his features. Some said he had a mustache, others swore he wore glasses. A few insisted they'd seen no one at all. But that night, a faint unease crept through Villisca. Something didn't feel right. The service ended around 9:30 p.m. The summer air was thick and warm, the moon a pale white coin hanging over the fields. The Moore family, along with Lena and Ina, began their walk home under the glow of oil street lamps. Josiah carried Boyd on his shoulders, Sarah held Catherine's hand, and the Stillinger girls whispered softly about the next day's picnic. They didn't notice the man behind them, just far enough away to stay hidden in the shadows. When they reached home, Sarah lit the kerosene lamp by the parlor window. Josiah went to lock the front door, a habit that was rare in Villisca, but one he'd picked up recently after someone had been stealing from barns outside town. Inside, the children changed into their nightclothes. Sarah folded their church outfits neatly on the chairs. The house grew still, the only sound, the faint ticking of the clock and the chirp of crickets outside. At 10 p.m., the lamp was turned down low. The Moores went to bed. Upstairs, Josiah and Sarah's room faced the street. Down the hall, the children shared their beds, Herman and Boyd in one room, Catherine and Paul in another. The Stillinger sisters slept in the guest room downstairs, just beside the parlor. By all accounts, it was a peaceful summer night, but not for everyone. Across the street, someone stood watching the Moore house. Neighbors would later recall hearing faint footsteps near the side yard, soft, deliberate. The family's chicken coop stirred once, then quieted again. No one saw who opened the back door. No one heard the faint creak of the attic steps, because, as later investigators would discover, the killer had been inside the house long before the Moores went to sleep. In the attic, he left behind a bowl of uneaten food and a partially smoked cigarette. There were small footprints in the dust near a narrow vent that looked down into the hallway below. He could see every light turning off, one by one. He waited, listening to them breathe. Just after midnight, the clock struck 12. A train whistle screamed from the edge of town, a sound that could drown out almost anything. That's when it likely began. Experts later believed the first blow came while Josiah and Sarah were still asleep. The killer struck fast, methodically, and without mercy. But that, would come later. For now, the Moore house sat under a blanket of stillness. The curtains were drawn. The lamp flickered once, then went out. A figure moved in the hallway, barely visible against the shadows. He carried something heavy, wooden handle, metal head. He stepped quietly from room to room. An axe. The clock stopped at 12:45 a.m. And Villisca would never be the same again. At dawn, the town woke to the sound of church bells and roosters. Children ran past the Moore house on their way to school, laughing. But inside, no one stirred. Neighbor Mary Peckham, an older widow who lived next door, noticed the silence. The Moore family was always up early, Josiah tending to chores, Sarah cooking breakfast, the children running about. But this morning, nothing. She waited an hour. By 8 a.m., her worry turned to dread. She approached the house, knocked softly. No answer. She tried the front door, locked. Mary let the chickens out, pretending not to feel the chill crawling up her neck. Finally, she called Josiah's brother, Ross. When he arrived, Ross used his key to open the door. The smell hit him first, metallic, heavy, wrong. He took one step into the parlor and stopped cold. The Stillinger sisters were lying still in their bed, the sheets darkened and stained, their faces covered with a piece of clothing. Ross stumbled back out of the house, gasping for air. Something terrible's happened, he whispered, and within minutes, the entire town of Villisca would know. By the time police arrived, the scene was chaos. Neighbors, reporters, even children crowded the moor yard. They trampled through rooms, stared at the bodies, and whispered theories before the sheriff could even take a single note. The murders were beyond anything Iowa had ever seen. And worse. The killer was nowhere to be found. The moment Sheriff Hank Horton stepped into the moorhouse, he knew nothing would ever be the same again. He'd seen accidents, fights, suicides, but never this. Never anything like this. The smell hung in the air, thick and metallic. Curtains drawn tight, the rooms too quiet. It felt like stepping into a dream where everything had stopped moving. Reporters were already gathering outside. Word traveled fast in a town like Villisca, and by 10 a.m., hundreds stood in the yard. The sheriff's deputy pushed them back, but it was too late. Curious neighbors had already come inside, stepping where they shouldn't, touching what they shouldn't. Whatever clues there had been were fading by the minute. Inside, the house told a story, one that didn't make sense. Every mirror had been covered with cloth. Each victim's face was concealed beneath a blanket or garment. And in every room, an oil lamp's chimney had been removed, its wick turned low, as if the killer wanted just enough light to see without being seen.